everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. Joining me today is the writer of comics like Analog, Infinity Countdown, and the upcoming Dead Rabbit. It's Gerry Duggan. Thanks for coming on, Gerry.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, we kind of set this up to a certain degree when we were both at ComicsPRO this past week in Portland. I want to start there because it's such an interesting event. How was your ComicsPRO? Like, I'm kind of interested in what it was like from a creator perspective.
You know what? It was fun. I wasn't sure what to expect. I love going to Portland, so out of the gate, I knew that I'd enjoy sort of walking around the city and getting to see some friends and grabbing a bite. But the idea too that in a former life, I worked for a retailer for a number of years, and actually it was my first job going way back. First job that wasn't a paper boy, but so those were my people. Like I really appreciated getting a chance to talk to them about what was working and what isn't working, and asking retailers how I can better promote the books and what they need from me. So I had a hoot. I always laugh. I spend so much time alone writing at home, and then at these functions, sometimes I feel like a dumb genie that somebody rubbed the lamp and I come out and then I listen to the sound of my own voice after a few minutes and I'm like, I hate my voice. I should shut up. But it was neat to meet so many different people from around the world, really, that all have the love of comics in common.
Yeah, I mean, so for listeners that don't know, ComicsPRO is it was an annual meeting for a bunch of comic book retailers, and it's a great event where publishers come out, creators come out, and they share kind of what they're up to and everything like that, and how you can better sell your books. But I always say this on my podcast. I think one of the most interesting things about comics retail, and I think it's like this for all retailers to a degree, but particularly for comics, like how reflective of personalities comic shops actually are, of like their owners in particular, because it changes how they recommend like relation. I did a podcast with John Hendrick from Big Bang Comics and Steve Anderson from Third Eye when I was there, and we were talking about how personality changes shops, but beyond that, how like relationships between creators and the shops and creators and the customers can change that. And it is really interesting being able to just see how different each personality of these retailers really are.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because my first comic shop growing up was a store that's not around anymore, but it was the definition of sort of a guy just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what would stick. So it had comics, but he was also selling vinyl and baseball cards and like old magazines, and it definitely had sort of the flea market vibe to it. Mm-hmm. But comics took off for him. But, he was still sort of trying those other things. I'm not necessarily sure that he had the passion for it, but he was like, hey, here's something that people are interested in. And then sort of finding stores where they were straight comic shops and seeing, you can sort of tell, what a retailer's reading by what's sort of at the front of the store with the first book. You see independent stuff, they're more likely to read indie stuff. You see a lot of Marvel and DC. Here's a superhero fan that went into the comic shop business. It's a fun Rorschach test.
I really do think that it is an interesting Rorschach test, because you can see, like, if you just look at Portland shops, for example, like you go to like Floating World where they have, did you go to Floating World by chance while you were there?
We popped into Floating World and I did a little guerrilla signing and I left every Deadpool trade. They actually had them all, which I'd never seen a shop have them all in order, for volumes, which was cool. And yeah, if I didn't have a stuffed bag, I'd have spent a couple $100 in there. The really cool thing about Floating World, as an aside, they publish their own comics too, and they're on their website. So if you guys want to see something that I've never ever really seen before, holy smoke, the stuff that Floating World is publishing is just incredible. Aside from that, the store looked wonderful too. Just what a cool store.
Yeah, it is really cool, and it actually kind of like harkens back to your first shop, because like they're one of the few shops I've been to that sells vinyl. and they have
Yeah.
that, and they have like all these cool art shows and stuff. And they have, it was funny because I bought this book that I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Comic Shop, and it's by Dan Guarino, and it's about the history of the direct market and comic shops.
Oh, neat.
Yeah,
That's I hadn't heard about that, but
it's really interesting. I was actually in Portland in January, and I was walking around the shop. I was walking around Floating World, and I just looked over and I was like, "What is this?" And they just had this book because I don't know, because it's reflective of the comic industry. But yeah, I think every shop in Portland is just kind of slightly different, and I think it's a really great place to go because they have so many shops to see how different retail really can be.
yeah, that's really cool. I bet you that book is really interesting. I mean, I grew up, you know, in a time when there was not a lot of direct market. There certainly it was the emerging direct market. Like when I started reading, it was like our best year for comics ever. It was like '86. But I was buying that stuff off newsstands, and it's hard, to replace those spinner racks. I guess the phones and the tablets are the new spinner racks today, the gateway into comics reading. But, every Halloween I put out my spinner rack from the office and give away a lot of comic books. And every year there's a couple of kids, who are, 10, 11, 12, 13, who have never held a comic before. And, boy, that is not how I did grow up and not how I would want to grow up.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, one of my big things I want to do is, we were talking before about how my wife and I bought this house a couple years ago. My wife is an architect, and I want to task her with the smallest architecture job. I want to do one of those like little libraries, like the lending libraries, and I just want to fill it with all ages comics for people to come by and grab. Like,
That's great.
I think that'd be fun. But so I do want to talk about your time working at a comic shop because you worked at Golden Apple Comics in Los Angeles, which I think from what I understand, great shop. And like one of the things I think is really interesting is how you met a lot of your collaborators there. From what I understand, like what was I've always heard from creators I talk to that working at a comic shop is a really important experience, especially if you're going to be working in direct market type comics. Like, how important was that experience for you as a creator?
Well, I think in the end it ended up being, critical. But at the time, I came out to Los Angeles about 20 years ago, and I had a bag of clothes, and I think I had $300 or $400. I think it was $400, and so I needed to find a job pretty quickly. The goal was get into writing, hopefully write for. At that time, I was like, let's shoot for the moon, try and write films, settle for TV. It's a much different world.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew a lot about comics, but I was walking up and down Melrose Avenue and putting in applications like at just any store that had a help wanted sign and some that didn't. And I was getting ready to turn around at the end of the first day of flyering the street with resumes. And I look, and there's Golden Apple, and there was not a help wanted sign in the window, but I went in anyway. And I had never seen a comic shop that big that had that many comics. It seemed like heaven. There were toys and games, but a wall of new comic books that stretched 30 yards. And so I asked if they were hiring. They said no, but go talk to Bill, the owner. And so I talked to Bill for about 10 minutes, and at the end of it, God bless him, he gave me a crack at it. He said, I'll try you for 2 weeks. And, I wanted to go in there and really work my ass off. And, I was the guy in the shop that could answer a lot of the comic book questions that some of the other staff couldn't. And so I'd come in early. I'd help them, sort the new books. When he bought a collection, I would price the old stuff and, just basic comic book clerk stuff. And what I thought was I'd save up for a car and then get on with my career, not really understanding that I had blundered into this amazing opportunity where, Hollywood was just, Hollywood's Sauron's eye was just turning to comics. Mm-hmm. And, it became, hey, where are your Hellblazer comics to going? Hey, I need 10 copies of the first Hellblazer trade. And, I knew what they were up to. They were developing Hellblazer. And look, one thing led to another. The real truth of it is, I ended up becoming friends, not just with the staff, but with a lot of, the shoppers. And some of those shoppers were people that I knew who I admired, like, stand-ups like Brian Posehn and Patton Oswalt, to people that I had never met before, but whose work I really enjoyed, like Dave Mandel. He was at the time writing Seinfeld. And, these all became friends and collaborators. And Brian and Patton introduced me to the folks at their production company that they were working in. They had a pilot at Comedy Central that took place in a comic shop. So I helped them make their set look like a real comic shop by getting folks that own their own IP to sort of just agree not to agree to let it be seen on the set. And the pilot didn't go, but it did, it got me in with that production company, got me a lot of work. And eventually I left Golden Apple. But the Leibowitzes were so good to me. And they sort of, the other interesting thing that working in a comic shop gave me, and this is really where, the comics of it all come back in, was sort of seeing how things are racked, seeing, like even Analog goes back to that experience, that selecting that name, because I knew that you'd have to read your solicits in alphabetical order. So you'd have to go through Analog to get to Saga. Do you know what I mean? Like you were going to order Saga and you might go, oh, hey, what's this Analog? So, the idea that, that I'm a better comics professional from having worked in a comic shop, I think is a no-brainer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I actually think that your idea about like naming Analog that, or naming any book like something with an A or something like that, is kind of sneaky genius, just because we're in this market where there's a lot of books out there. So being seen first before like, retailers are just like glazed over when they're like looking through this magazine or through previews, that there's like a real advantage to that. And,
it's silly. But yeah, it's true. Like I think, and even knowing how the new wall in a comic shop works, like knowing that like at the front of the alphabet, you're more likely to see the entire issue, versus when you get towards the end of the alphabet, you sort of run out of room on the new book wall. And so, all of a sudden comics are half obscured by the next comic, right? So there's a placement issue, and even Dead Rabbit, which is the new book I'm doing with John McCrea at Image. It's its own thing, but I liked the idea that when we settled on Dead Rabbit, that, you'd stock that next to Deadpool, hopefully. And so, if there were fans of mine from Deadpool, hey, this is different, but you might like it anyway, and it's next to each other.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to, think about stuff.
I appreciate it because my dad is a water well driller, and he actually owns a company that is named AAROW, Arrow, because of the old Yellow Pages thing. You always want to be in the front, so you name yourself something ridiculous that isn't even a word. To your credit, Analog, actually a word that makes sense with your comic. Huge advantage.
Yes, that felt like that was the no-brainer once we settled on that.
Yeah. So I do want to talk, like, jump into Analog and just kind of, this is just me as an outsider. Deadpool's kind of wrapping up. You have, Infinity Countdown Prime, which I really enjoyed. Actually, the book you did with Allred, the Star-Lord, or not the Star-Lord,
the Warlock issue.
Warlock one, that was just fantastic. Of course, like, it's Mike Allred, so that's a huge advantage.
Yeah, and Mike and Laura just destroyed that. What was really cool about that, the Infinity Countdown, the Warlock issue, was, we had talked about that was going to be an issue of Guardians, and then when we sort of said, hey, we're going to blow up the story, it's going to get a lot bigger, a lot quicker, which is where I was going anyway. The cool thing was it was going to spin out of Guardians. It just spun out of Guardians a little bit earlier, but having Mike and Laura do that first issue just felt like, oh, this is the only excuse we need to sort of make it bigger is Mike and Laura. And, Mike is the world's biggest Warlock fan. So he basically replied quicker than I'd ever seen anyone agree to work with me. He wrote the editor back right away and was like, yep, let's go. I don't even care about schedule. And he was so nice and so generous. And, I the way that I work, I told him, I said, look, if you have to shift some stuff around, go for it. I'm going to repolish my script before it goes to letters anyway. And the first thing he did, and both Aaron Cooter and I just thought this was genius. He said, I missed the bolt. So on that first page, I think he touches his staff to his chest and returns the bolt to the new the new look that Aaron created for him. And Aaron just goes, "Oh, of course, that's genius." So out of the gate, it was this great lesson in collaboration from the Allreds of going, oh yeah, that is exactly the finishing move that look needed. And I think Mike appreciated, Warlock hasn't been seen in a while in the comics. We wanted to, at the same time that we were looking backwards at the character, hopefully reposition him by looking forwards, and they just killed it. It'll be a classic comic book for none of my doing, just what they did. So yeah, thank you. I'm glad you dug it.
I had no idea that he actually was a giant Warlock fan. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I don't know why. It just
he's and the cool thing for Mike was when I sort of said, hey, we need to re-educate fans, so I really want to do sort of the greatest hits, and the way that we're going to do it is by pairing him up with Kang. And so he really got to sink his meat into, he drew everything, even Warlock was killed way back in the day for the first time, I think, when he hit on Lady Sif and Thor had to brain him with Mjolnir, so he got to do it all. And then later we talked about, I scripted this and I said, you could ignore it if you think it's silly, but I think it'd be kind of cool, to pay tribute to the king. And so on the last page, when we're at Kang's place at the end of time, we put Kirby's drawing desk, his drawing tables there, which felt like a fun little Easter egg.
Yeah, that was a good one. I do have to actually ask. It's funny, I wasn't even planning on talking about Countdown here, but now I have to ask. Did you script Dupe into the big death pile, or was that him?
No, I just said, here's who I need, and draw whoever else you want. And when I saw Dupe, I was like, oh, that's great. That's fantastic.
Anytime Dupe can appear, I'm more than happy for it. Yeah. But I mean, so just as an outsider, one of the weird things is like you have Deadpool wrapping up, you have Infinity Countdown. Like this is like a huge project that's gigantic. But it kind of feels like you're doubling down on creator-owned right now. You have Analog coming out in April. You have Dead Rabbit in the summer, both at Image. Am I off base in saying that, or are you just trying to look to like mix things up a bit with your current Marvel mix too?
No, I don't think so. I think, look, I've been at Marvel for 5 years. I mean, Image published me, they broke me. They agreed to, say yes to me when no one else had. So I've always been grateful for that. And, I wanted to keep making comics, but, and keep making creator-owned comics. But, my son was just born, and, it's hard when you are making creator-owned comics. You have to do so many things on your own that you end up with several jobs, not just the one job. And so I was writing on Attack of the Show for many years, and then Marvel came calling, and I was super thrilled to be asked to be part of that Deadpool team 5 years ago. And the last place I saw myself was spending 5 years on the book. But boy, has Deadpool been good to me, and I hope we will have been as good to Deadpool as he's been to me. But I just missed making creator-owned comics. And, look, Analog, it's funny. Even though it seems like I'm pivoting hard, it's actually, you're just seeing, the fruition of work that's been sort of going on in secret for a long time.
Yeah, you started Analog in like late 2015, I read?
2015, believe it or not. That's how long it really took me. David is much faster sort of than I anticipated even. And so I was grateful that my schedule meant that I had to slow down a little bit, because after David had drawn, I think maybe even the first 2 issues, we got into the election, and that really changed my thinking on it. And so I had to write him a note and go, hey, I'm just so you know, I'm going to be rewriting some of this to sort of match where I think the story goes from here. And now it feels like, having let this simmer for a long time, that we're coming out at a time when the premise just seems a lot less outlandish, and B, that we might really be able to comment on where we're going in the near term. For those of you that don't know, it's a pretty simple pitch. It's that in the early 2020s, the internet is so insecure that no one sends secrets over the internet anymore. It still exists. You're only really on the internet, though, if you don't mind the world knowing what you are doing there. And so men with guns in one hand and briefcases in the other come back to move secrets around. And I think, selfishly for me, anytime you can, get rid of a character's cell phone, you've done your story you've given your story a great gift. And so that's where that comes from for me. And Analog, since we've started talking about it now, since that we announced it at New York, the first issue goes to press in about a week, I guess. So if we're coming up on final order cutoff, and there's a typewriter. There's a guy who sells typewriters out in Los Angeles, and word got back to me that he can't really keep them on shelves anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And a political organization cleaned him out of everything that he had in stock. I mean, people really are pivoting to a somewhat more analog life, for obvious reasons now.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny because you've been working on this book for so long that, like, it kind of became reality in some ways. That it almost gives it like a the sad thing is if it had been announced in 2015, which would have been a horrible idea from a marketing standpoint, then people wouldn't be able to accuse you of you being like Law and Order ripped from the headlines.
Yeah, it's true.
It is, but I mean that's the thing that's really amazing about it is like there's this one moment in the first issue of the book that really hit home for me. There's like two people they're like naked in a car who are like live streaming their sex, and they were taking a break to respond to a patron question about what kind of car they were having sex in. And like it hit me for two reasons. One, I have a Patreon, so I felt kind of assaulted with that. I was just like, damn it. And I also felt shame because I realized I'm like, damn, I actually like I will sell out things. I'm just like very Yeah. It's like I think too much about like what my patrons are looking for, and in reality they're just like happy to support this thing that I do, but I'm kind of like those people in the car. But it is interesting because the whole idea of Analog is like what people do when privacy is no longer a thing, and we're already kind of seeing that to a degree because people are kind of giving it up willfully right now. It's
really interesting. There's that old saying that if you're not paying for it, you are the product. And
right.
I think that's look at what the weaponized information did in the last election.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't probably see a lot of the targeted ads that they did because that I was not in their target market. But you had given Facebook and Google so much that of course someone's able to buy something and basically hit you with it on repeat that changes your way of thinking. I worry a lot. I have a son who will be 9 this spring, and we're trying to raise him to, and believe me, anyone that follows my dumb Twitter is going to laugh at this, but we're trying to raise him to be a little mysterious. There's also a really sort of just a really unctuous comment from the former head of Google, who said, the only way to really have your privacy after your childhood is to change your name.
Mm-hmm.
I get it, but at the same time, I'm not sure any of us have done anything so horrible that our past misdeeds need to be indelibly written into our permanent record.
Mm-hmm.
And so the cool thing for me about Analog is that some days I wake up and the world of the book seems like a nightmare. And then other days I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, what a delight. And so depending on which way the wind is blowing in our real lives, that it makes it feel a little different. And it's a very character driven piece. I wish I could say, oh, if you loved my Deadpool, you'll love this. It's just a different beast. It's a different story. It's a different world. It's like it stars a kind of half drunk human punching bag who's had something to do with the great doxing that made the world, and we'll sort of unpack that as time goes on. And he's romantically linked to a woman who backs him up on some jobs, and whose hobby it is to go out and sort of physically dismantle white supremacist meetings. So she's got a reason to be that angry. We're sort of leaping over the current political situation, and just sort of, when you land on the other side, it's like some of those, negative pieces of society that have been emboldened are still sort of there on the other side. And I think that's going to be the lasting, real inheritance from these years, is just, the idea of how fractured we've become.
Right.
And look, even the money behind Texas secession and Cal exit is all foreign money. Anything that destabilizes Western governments is very good for the oligarchs, and that's the world. I was I realized writing it, it was like a piece of writing in a comic book that was sort of looking for a home, and unfortunately, our home became it.
I actually, my day job is at an advertising agency working in online and social media. And so I've been kind of exposed to like the way that, social media works, and like just the internet in general, and how targeting works, and how, like, in theory it could be abused, because like that's effectively what they're challenging you to do with your advertising. I read that Wired article you shared in your email. And that was really fascinating. I think the saddest part about the whole thing, and I'll link to the Wired article in the post of this, is it's a big exploration of Facebook's last 2 years, and how basically things went wrong, and how they've kind of extremely slowly adjusted to it. And the thing I thought was the most amazing about it was not that like there was the Russian meddling, which I feel like everybody can, we know that happened now. It's the fact that they only had to spend $100,000 to basically overthrow the, democracy. And
yeah, it was for very little money, right? That they sort of, like, who knows, what else was going on. But you're right. Like, and also the idea that, it's like Facebook sort of said, we have a Twitter problem. We better become Twitter. We,
right.
Make our, and then, as that sort of worked for Facebook, the devaluing of news, right? And how $100,000 feels like a lot of money now, and in a news cycle that it's a real shame, at the same time that you sort of have Facebook. By the way, about that article, there's a lot of just fascinating, scary quotes in it in the Wired piece, but the one that got me was the obviously unnamed Facebook employee who sort of likened Zuckerberg to being Lenny from
was
not quite sure how strong he actually is, and you're like, boy, that is a scary thought to just drop on us. But yeah, it's nuts. But the thing I wanted to finish, I know I'm sort of jumping all around, but the other scary thing about our news situation is that, out here in Los Angeles, we had a great independent paper called the LA Weekly. And, it was bought by a guy who actually appeared in a Russian propaganda video.
Right.
So we know where his interests lie. And then he fired they brought in a new EIC, and they fired all the employees. And then I think the writing disappeared too. So like the bank, I'm not sure that the old articles are even up anymore. But look, it was a very left-leaning newspaper that now ceased to exist. And the assault on independent journalism is on. It's been on for a while, and I think we're sort of late to understand the full ramifications of that.
Mm-hmm.
That on top of the devaluing of journalism, based on what Facebook would pay you for, is we're in a really bad spot, in this country for true journalism. But,
yeah, I mean, social media is basically the key to all traffic. And it's really fascinating, like reading that article and how they can't even decide what their approach is. Like the question about whether or not they're a platform or they're a, God, what was the other one? I forgot what it was. But basically whether or not they're a platform or a publisher, effectively. Yeah. And it's really interesting. But this all kind of underlines something I wanted to talk to you about, which I thought is kind of interesting. Like in my head, in like my brain space for the Gerry Duggan like canon, basically, you're a funny guy. You're like a funny writer. And one thing I think that is interesting about this is it's like Analog is an very like there's a great kind of like adventurous feel to it because of the lead character Jack McGinnis's nature as a ledger man, one of the people who was taking these secrets around. But like it's clear that you're putting a lot of thought and a lot of like your kind of I don't know, like your fears of the world into this book. Do you feel like after years writing at Marvel is it good for you to explore your writing voice a bit and push yourself in different directions than like readers might expect out of you or maybe even want from you at this point?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think I sincerely love my Deadpool work. Being able to collaborate on that was such an unexpected joy, and it brought me, it helped elevate me. It helped my collaborators. I think it certainly was good for my career, and I got good at it. I hope I wasn't complacent. I work really hard to make sure that those scripts on the way out the door, on the way to press, are getting enough love, and I'm trying to beat the joke. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's anyone who's ever met me know I'm not in a gym very much. I'm in front of a computer screen getting softer and fatter and older. But the like it's a little like leg day, mm-hmm. where Deadpool was, my legs are buff enough, and now I sort of want to flex some other muscles, as long as those muscles are just strictly metaphorical, of course. But the idea that that writing, I think, could actually elongate or extend my Marvel career. I think that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You want to try different things. You want to do things where you risk failure. I used to work on that show, Attack of the Show. We had an epic fail portion of Attack of the Show. It was end of the day. It was a fail video, somebody getting hit or whatever. And, I realized, I was like, oh, that's this young generation sort of is assigning a much sort of heavier price to failure than anyone should. Mm-hmm. I failed a million times. And look, I had a comic that I did with Phil Noto back in the day that I was so proud of that I felt like I failed Phil on, where I just was like, I didn't have a great business plan, and we got 3 of the 6 out. Eventually we went back and finished it, but like that felt like a failure, that I had failed, not the story necessarily, but certainly the ability to get the story rolled off a printer was mm-hmm. my finest hour. And so you have to fail in order to succeed. Someone said something interesting about art once, but it's really true. I don't know who this quote this is, so forgive me, but it's essentially, you want to be an artist, you have several thousand pages of crappy art to like draw out of you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably true for any creative pursuit, but it's true for writing. Go write something and finish it, but have it not be good.
Right.
Do that over and over and over again, and eventually you'll find work that you don't hate, and that if you're lucky and you keep at it, then you'll find that you've made something you don't hate that has traction. And then eventually you'll write something that you really like. And, I've been lucky enough over the years to see that happen in lots of different ways. much, but it's been, 25 years of writing, and probably only, at most 7 or 8 years that anybody's ever heard my name.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's it's like the Malcolm Gladwell thing of, what is it, 10,000 hours? I feel like
Yeah, that's right.
I feel like I'm more of like a 1,000-hour guy, and I feel like I'm okay. But eventually I'll get up to being good at stuff. But I do think that one of the interesting things about my own like headcanon, I think it's funny how people assign these values to people about what they are, despite the fact that I know for a fact that you're not just the funny guy. Like, one of my favorite stories that you did in any comic was, I love the good, the bad, and the ugly. Was that the name of the Deadpool arc with Declan?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. That's a great one, but that's also kind of a heartbreaking arc. And it's interesting because it's like we're so quick to think of Deadpool as a funny book, but it also has like a lot of depth to it. So it's like your analog self is within your Deadpool self. It's just like maybe we don't necessarily think of you that way.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, look, here's the thing: is that I think my sort of 1-2 punch, my sweet and sour, is sad and funny, and I think I can, I kidded around once with my wife. I said, I was like, I think it was, I got bit by my secret, my secret origin is I got bit by a radioactive sad clown, and then I was like, oh, that's a good Deadpool line. I got to give that to Deadpool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of summed up what I thought my experiences were as the custodian of Deadpool these years, or co-custodian of Deadpool when I was writing with Posehn.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that I just tried to find characters to bounce off of Deadpool. I really think this is true. I tried to just write the villains and write them well. And then Deadpool sort of took care of himself. And that's why I thought it was most of my work on Deadpool, when the art comes back, is actually on Deadpool.
Mm-hmm.
If I am rewriting what the villain is saying or his intentions, I've probably really screwed up. But, Deadpool sort of gives me the opportunity to sort of go back and figure out what the best version. Like, I'm sitting on Deadpool 297 tonight. I didn't turn it back in because there's one panel that doesn't make me laugh, and it's clearly in need of a laugh line, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't have it, but I don't need it until it goes to press on Friday. And look, a lot of that comes from when I was doing live TV with Kevin Pereira and Olivia Munn. There were days that, we were live at 4 p.m. Pacific every day. And, there's stuff loaded into the prompter. But on more than one occasion, I remember, the tag to a video, that often we just needed a joke for, had nothing in prompter because we were still going back and forth about it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that we didn't get it until the video ran. And then they had, their ears were mic'd. So I'd lean forward and pitch a joke, at the very last possible second before they were going to have to say something. And it's not how you want to do business. You want to have it at the read through at noon that day and have everyone laugh and feel very confident. And just some days are harder than others. That's why staffs of big shows with, a lot of writers, that there's a lot of security there. You never have to be the guy that is carrying it around. On Attack of the Show, at most there was ever 2 writers on a show at one time. So
I actually didn't know you did Attack of the Show until this podcast. When I was in college, it was like G4 was on our TVs all the time. And it was that and X-Play. Those were like the 2 big ones for me.
Yeah. I got hired to do sketches for 2 weeks, and it turned into a 5-year career, and I had my son on their health plan, and they were very good to me too. It was a good situation, and doing 1,000 hours of live TV really sort of sharpens you for what's to come. Comic books. It was like training in Denver for comic books. Someone goes, oh yeah, you're gonna have to do 18 Deadpool scripts this year. It's like, don't worry,
I worked in television.
Yeah, I worked in television by myself on a live TV show. Not by myself, but like basically every day you were sort of carrying a show, and then the next day your partner would carry it, and you just try to pitch jokes And, you know, I think for most of that, we were 3 writers for about 3 years. And then in year 4 and 5, we ended up getting a few extra writers that, boy, did that really make life a lot easier. But it was good. It was a trial by fire, and it forced you to, you know, on a live TV show, you might write a joke that killed, that was great. You might have had a great show, jokes everywhere, or you might have had a show that went into the toilet where nothing worked, and either way, you just couldn't think about it because the next day you had another hour to fill and there was no content yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very good experience. I regret, you know, there really aren't that many places for people to get live TV experience.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No,
I'm
it's
getting all messages.
it's okay. I listened to a podcast once about with Trey Parker and Matt Stone about like the making of South Park, and it was really fascinating listening to them and about how like basically how lean you have to get to keep doing those things, and how like it kind of like it whittles down like it almost down to an instinctual level, and it really like I imagine that's probably good for sharpening your voice in the long run.
I think so. You know, the idea of working very hard when you're younger to sort of work smarter or better when you're a bit older, it feels like that's a good thing to do. You know, I definitely there were things that I did back then that definitely sort of helped me find, I think, that the voice for Deadpool that has been so successful. You know, the only the only bit of writing I showed Jordan at the time, you know, I'd written a couple comics. I'd done Last Christmas with Rick Remender and Brian Posehn about Santa Claus after the apocalypse, and then I did the book with Phil. And those are obviously 2 very different things. The book with Phil was sort of a near-future odyssey set where soldiers are trying to get back from a war in Syria, which also now, unfortunately, sort of were there a little bit. But pardon me, back then it was a little more outlandish. But I'd written a Cheers spec. Mm-hmm. So it took place. Are you a baseball fan at all?
Yeah.
It took place in right after Game 6 ended of the '86 World Series. So the Mets had just forced a Game 7.
The Buckner Ball.
Yeah, the Buckner Ball had just happened, and everyone in the pub, everyone in Cheers thought that they were going to be celebrating the World Series. And then Cliff had gotten so drunk that over the course of that night, he sort of became aware that he was a character in a sitcom. And so he was sort of trying to
Of course it was Cliff. It had to be Cliff.
It had to be Cliff because I was like, I knew what I was doing immediately, because I was like, oh, well, of course it ends with Cliff going postal and killing everyone because they don't matter. They're characters in a sitcom. Mm-hmm. And, you know, along the way, I had him like end the bar wars with Gary's Old Town Tavern, and he arsoned that place, and the cops came, and, you know, he shot a bunch of people. He couldn't shoot Woody. He said that'd be like shooting my dog. So he sent him up the stairs, and then the police came, and he was barricaded in the pool room, and the cops were like, isn't there something you want? And I had John Ratzenberger at the end said, yeah, I want to go where no one knows my name. And he blew his head off.
Oh my God.
Then it was like sort of cut to like, credits. And in retrospect, I sort of thought, oh, well, this is my ticket. I'm going to get, because there was also around that time, someone had written a Friends episode where all the friends get AIDS, or there was another one like that just was filled with curses. Like people had to sort of start to do, or they felt they needed to do surprising things in spec scripts in order to make it to the top of a read pile. Mm-hmm. I thought, well, this will get me work. That is not what happened. I think they were like, this guy's psychotic, and let's set this aside and call the FBI. But I did share it with Jordan, who I think was a little nervous because Jordan was the Deadpool editor even back then, and was being told, oh, you got to hire Posehn and Duggan and let them write Deadpool for a little bit when Dan Way comes off the book. And he was like, they have almost no comics credits. And, Axel was hoping that he would say yes to it. And Rick really was coming in strong. And even in the end, like Bendis and Brubaker were like, hey, give these guys a chance. I don't think it was until he read that Cheers spec that he necessarily felt comfortable that I could write Deadpool. So it did, that also, by the way, while we talk about the Cheers spec, I almost didn't finish it because I sort of knew it was like kind of extra crazy. But that was another lesson in finishing what you start. If there's anyone out there that wants to make comics, even if you sort of suspect that what you're doing is not necessarily turning out the way you hoped or your best work, you got to finish it in order to level up. Mm-hmm. That's sincerely so true. It almost doesn't count unless you finish it. So I'm glad I did. It helped me get this job, and hopefully you're exciting on the page and boring in real life and beat your deadlines and sort of do those things, and maybe you can stick around for a little while. I've been so grateful to Marvel over the years. When I told them that, co-writing Deadpool wasn't going to be a career, they really went to bat and they found other things for me to write, like Hulk and Nova. And, that continues to this day with CB now, getting a big shot at this big cosmic story that I'm telling. And, I still have room enough in my schedule that I can do my independent stuff. And I'm very, very lucky.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to give you a quick radioactive sad clown recommendation before we jump back to analog. If you haven't read Xander Cannon's Kaiju Max, it sounds very specifically your jam. I don't know.
I check it out. I'm writing it down now.
Yeah, it is the perfect mix of sad and funny. And it's about a kaiju or a supermax prison for Godzilla's, basically. It's like Oz meets Godzilla. It's really good. So back to analog. I love the idea of the Ledgermen, or like the paper jockeys as they're often called. That's basically like it's all built around Jack McGinnis and him being that guy. I think it's one of the things I love about it is the fact that, like, no matter what happens, like whenever there's like a crazy disruption in the world or something bad happens, there's always going to be somebody who comes out of nowhere to make money off of it. And that's kind of the Ledgermen. That's what they do.
Totally.
What made Jack and his job the perfect entryway into Analog's world?
That's a great question. I think part of it, and this is just a peek behind the curtain of, it's hard to write. It's hard to write things that feel 10 minutes off, because there are so many unexpected things that can happen that could make you look like a dunce later. And so I try to not write too many near future things, but I find myself gravitating towards it because I'm obsessed with it a little bit. I guess I'm sort of a failed futurist, but the idea that people will turn to an analog life, I think, is somewhat inevitable. I think when the full sort of revelations of the Facebook stuff from 2016 sort of are laid bare, I don't really use Facebook much anymore, and I like the idea. Sort of selfishly, I guess, the thing that Jack does is Jack gives me someone that, will tackle the antagonist head on so I can get some action, which you got to have in a comic book like this. And then Jack will also travel. It's have gun and suitcase will travel. And that's how we're going to see the world. The thing is, when he goes to Tokyo in issue 4, mm-hmm. The thing I really like about it is Japan embraces analog in the world, and they kind of look almost like they're in the 70s, like people are in bell bottoms and mustaches and sort of long hair, and there's wood paneling, and they sort of embrace that, but then also sort of embrace the aesthetic that came with it. Mm-hmm. And the crazy thing for them is, they still have that high tech side. They've developed AI, and like the super cool thing in Analog 4, and David O'Sullivan did such a good job with this. I pitched him a really crazy idea. I said, we need to sort of see this representation of AI that's never been seen, because, we've seen the HAL version of it. We've sort of seen, the physical sort of robot body that is a mirror of us. And the thing that I'd never seen was sort of a computer life form that would pick all of it at once. So it's sort of interesting to see Jack in this world where it is analog, but then there's almost like this AI zoo, and it's all like the bodies that are in there. It's the AI seeing what it's like to move like a monkey, or move like a plant, or move like a gorilla or a bird, or even like a little robot girl. That, like, why wouldn't you want to inhabit those bodies, and what would that say? So it's a it's a really crazy visual smorgasbord of design work. And, but it felt right. It felt like, oh, that is what would sort of happen there. They would be able, I think, to pivot to some of those crazier ideas. And look, I'm a guy who I've been worried about the climate forever. There was a kid growing up named Craig Hansen who was growing up in Ridgewood, and I forget whether it was either his father or his grandfather or his uncle was Dr. Hansen, who had been ringing the climate alarm bell since like the 70s. So I'd been hearing about it and sort of going to sleep nervous about it for a lot longer, I think, than most people. And so I'm excited to sort of get to Phoenix and see what Phoenix is like in 2024. And I really want to explore what I think the world is like when you turn away from the digital log flume of the internet, and in some ways it slows down, and in other ways it might even speed up. But it's I think I said this before. For me, the number one thing is it allows me to have an action adventure, and there are no reliable sort of phones or computers on somebody. They ruin so many stories.
Yeah. I actually, I've heard people say or talk about how many movies can't be remade just because if you have a phone, it would just ruin it.
Yeah.
And it is kind of funny. I do want to say one of my favorite things about Jack, and granted, I've only read the first 3 issues, so I may be misunderstanding the character. I find him to be super charming because he's simultaneously extremely competent and extremely incompetent. And I think that's a very good mix for a character.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. He has some good ideas, and his execution isn't great. I mean, he looks like a guy who's going to go into the fight and win the fight, but he kind of gets knocked on his ass a bunch. And that's fun to play with too. He's getting a little bit older. He's got a dad to take care of. And the fun thing, we've talked a little bit about the world. The interesting thing that I'm having fun with is also the one of the antagonists who only wants to be known as Aunt Sam. So it's Uncle Sam's girlfriend here in this version. But, she's trying to reconstitute the NSA by setting up, copiers in all the major sort of travel hubs so that they can, they're not trying to necessarily step on the paper jockeys, but they want to.
They want to own the secrets.
Yeah, they want to own the secrets. And that means literally photocopying the stuff in the case whenever they can. And, the paper jockeys will try to outmaneuver them, and sometimes they will and sometimes they won't. It starts to feel a little bit like Brazil. It's sort of like if, today the Coens were sort of going to try and do a near future sci-fi thing. The idea that, you have these sort of big ideas, but then sort of they're met with incompetence, on all fronts. That's where you have a lot of fun.
Yeah. This is just a quick random aside, but I think it's really funny that there are 2 comics I've read in the last couple of weeks that are near future dystopias where it's just like, I can't believe this. Like, they both take place in 2024, and you still can't believe that the world was broken that fast. One, believe it or not, I mean, actually probably you may have read it, was in Wade and Somney's Captain America. And
right.
that's taking place in 2024, and Cap's like, oh, how did this all go wrong? What year is this? They're like, how long did it take for America to be broke? And they're like, it's 2024, dude.
Yeah.
But anyways, it is interesting because, like, that's, I think part of the reason why stories like that work so well right now in particular is it's just like you can see the roadmap there right now. And it's interesting because it's like, going back to that Wired article, one thing that I thought was really fascinating about it was, and it's a question I ask myself too as a social media professional, is like, how much of the onus falls on the people and how much of the onus falls on the companies? And it's like, how much, like, when, if the great doxing actually happened, a lot of people wouldn't care because they're already out there. They're already doxing themselves effectively,
Yeah, that's the thing, right? You sort of worry. We're in a strange spot because we have people sort of giving up so many freedoms and not like I mentioned before I wrote for Attack of the Show. I also at a certain point engaged with the WGA to try and get coverage there. So I organized not just Attack but these other shows to basically, we were just sort of saying we'd like the guild to represent us for the purposes of collective bargaining. And I just, having that union experience and seeing sort of the country's attitudes toward organized labor, unions union members used to get like their heads split open, to fight for some of the stuff that feels like we're actually just giving that stuff up now.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been a little bit of left of center in a lot of ways, but yeah, I'm shocked at the level of I guess apathy towards private data and also just rights. Like, I think we have a lot of rights that we're giving up to the government and to corporations.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. There's not going to be a good outcome from any of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, like, sometimes it's like you almost need science fiction to open your eyes. I'm not saying analog is that, but it is interesting to think about that in context of where we're at. But I'm embarrassed. We're this far into the podcast. I haven't talked about art, which is kind of like an essential part of my show. You have David O'Sullivan, who's completely new, or like in my mind, like is new to the world of comics, even though he's been working on it for a very long time. He, from what I understand, was recommended to you by Declan and Jordy, who is your colorist in the book. What made these two the right fits for bringing analog to life?
Well, I saw I'd been talking to Declan. I said, look, I have a couple of ideas for stuff that doesn't quite fit in at Marvel, and I don't have the energy anymore to try and get traction by like writing a pilot.
Right.
All of my traction is in comic books. It's the path of least resistance, and I like making them. So I've been threatening to do more creator owned for a long time now, and Declan said, well, look, I'm busy. However, I've got a mate named David. And, I start getting a little nervous where I'm like, oh, his buddy is like, is not going to be any good. And I instantly fell in love with him from the first panel that Declan showed me. And so I said, boy, would you introduce me? And from there, I pitched him Analog, and then, I got him a script. Probably maybe a month later, I had gone away, maybe slightly more, but I really needed to sort of, everything takes a long time at the beginning. It takes someone a little bit longer to write the first issue, and it certainly takes someone a little bit longer to draw the first issue. And once we started clicking, I felt like, we really got to this interesting place that, Jordy came in, and has done a wonderful job on colors. I can't imagine anyone but David and Jordy working on this. He's yes, this is his first published work, but he just feels like a vet. Like, the stuff that he's doing on these pages is just, it's incredible line work, but it's also not everyone's figures, it's sort of like acting. The idea that these figures are so expressive that I have to do a lot less with the balloons. You
Hmm.
know, he's so good, and also he's painting the covers. It's like, give me a break. You know, he's got these like Fabry level good covers where I'm like, ugh, you don't deserve all the talent just running through your veins.
Yeah,
It's disgusting.
he is ridiculously talented. It's I one of the things that I always think is really interesting, like it's you sometimes see artists who I've heard people kind of call them like pinup artists. Basically, it's like where they just do a bunch of like pinups and stuff, but they don't ever actually learn how to tell stories. But David is just so tight with his
Yeah,
storytelling from day one. I mean,
totally.
it's really impressive, and it's like I don't know, it like naturally your brain tries to connect him to like some sort of like, oh, he's kind of like this, like it's like the covers kind of remind me of like Matt Kint and how he kind of uses washes and like
Yeah.
and watercolors, but it's like he's not remotely like Matt Kint in terms of how he does his like line work or his figure work or anything like that. But there's just he's just phenomenal, and it's really impressive to see him coming out like this, off the start.
Yeah, I was not kidding around when I told him. I said, "Thank you so much for working with me before someone comes and steals you away from me."
I do want to shout out like one thing that I think is really impressive about the book from what I read was I've mentioned this on the show before for Image Books, they're not really soliciting books until I think it's 3 issues are done completely. And one thing that is really staggering, and I'm sure retailers would love to know, is the fact that you guys are already working on the second trade of this book and it's not even out yet. Is that true?
Yeah, that is. It's funny. I've only slowed down in the last month because I've been so busy sort of promoting the book and traveling and stuff. But yeah, he's wrapping up the work on the first trade, beginning work on the second trade, and I'm writing ahead. So yeah, we'll run monthly without stopping, I think, and I think through issue 10 before we might take just a break to get caught up so that trade 3 would run uninterrupted.
Yeah.
That's the fun thing, right? About working in secret on stuff is we were able to do that. I think crazily. I think Rick's new book with Bengal is like done through 6 issues or something.
Yeah, that's it's always really good for a book to have that for 2 reasons. One, it's like, readers can trust it's going to happen. More importantly, retailers can trust that because I feel like an underrated ability in comics is reliability and
Yeah.
like having the ability to assure everyone that this is going to be coming out on time in a predictable way is like is a really really valuable asset in your pocket.
Yeah, thank you. All credit to David and now to Jordy, who's getting caught up. She was really pleasantly surprised to find how far we were ahead when she turned her back, and then like almost a year later, we'd amassed this little war chest of art for her to go color.
Hmm.
It's been neat. I think that's also part of the bonus stat to comic book making you get when you're a retailer. I remember what those days were like. Telling fans of books that there was that their favorite book was not in stock, and we had no information on when they would actually be seeing the book. So.
Hmm. So the last question I have for you is I want to talk really quick about Dead Rabbit, mostly
Yeah.
just so we can fanboy out about John McCrea.
Oh my gosh, yeah, no.
I am, it is kind of interesting. You have 2 books coming out from Image. You have one book you're pairing with a relative newcomer. On the other, you're partnering with a legend. So I'm kind of curious, what came first on Dead Rabbit? Was it the partnership with John, or was it the idea?
No, I think it was the partnership. The idea had been floated to me from 2 different people about working with John. Rick Remender had mentioned it, and then Eric Stevenson at Image had mentioned it. And sort of both times I was like, I would love to work with John. I was like, that is not the question that needs answering. The question that needs answering is, does John McCrea want to get into the Gerry Duggan business?
Right.
And I bet John McCrea has some better things to do with his time. Fortunately, that was not true. He was only too happy to hear a couple of pitches, and this was really the only one that we talked about. I think the interesting thing to us would be to go, look. I think the reason that I read comics anyway is that I find our world lacks a lot of basic justice, and this comic is about finding out what it's like to be a criminal and even who is a criminal in a criminal world.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fair that Martin Dobbs' wife is sick, but he's going to make it better, and he's going to punch the lights out of anyone that gets in his way. So he was a masked criminal for a long time in 90s Boston, and he stopped doing that out of love, and now he's returning to a life of crime also out of love. So it has elements of Robin Hood and of Unforgiven, but it really is a book about love.
Well,
sincerely. So there's that. You're doing it you're doing the bad thing for the right reason, and that
Right.
always feels like when you're down that path, boy, that's a fun path to be on.
Yeah. I do want to say that, like, it's fairly obvious for me as a person who was at Image Expo that John is into the idea, given the fact that he came out cosplaying as the character.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that was so good. I mean, it's just like I mean, that's one of the things about Image Expo that's kind of interesting is, like, it's not everyone's used to doing things like that, but you just have to find a way to stand out. I feel like John succeeded in that regard.
Yeah. He did. He showed up as our character, the spitting image of the character. He had the mask on underneath the cap. John's been a legend, and deservedly so, for a long time. But I say this, and obviously I'm biased, but I think the pages that you're going to see from John are just going to blow you away. This is John in love with his work. And boy, does it show. John talked about, I'm not talking at school, the idea that, he had felt like at times, in his career after Hitman, that, he had done some things maybe too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you sort of, you can get into a situation in comic books when, an editor you like is in a jam, or there's a deadline and it just has to be beat. And, you do that because you obviously want to keep your lights on, but the idea that you could sort of help someone out of a jam, and if it doesn't look the way you want it to, you really haven't done yourself any favors long term. And so, boy, this stuff that you're going to see from John is just, if you were in love with John before, this is a whole new level of love you're going to have for John. So I'm blown away. It's a neo-noir crime thing that will be sad and funny. We meet a character in the second issue that I just adored, and I hated to see him go through a windshield, but he had to go through the windshield. And John sort of lusciously drew the most delightful sort of screw up from a bank job I've ever seen. And it's great. It feels so fun to be telling stories that only sort of fit into this image box. It is an adult, it will be rated M for sure. I'll send you, we have the first 8 pages. I know just as a fan, you dig his stuff. I'd be interested to know what you think. And then at C2E2, we'll have an ash can for the retailers, I think. The Diamond Expo is there. So I think everyone with a Diamond account is going to get the first issue of Dead Rabbit a couple of months before anyone else.
That's great.
Yeah, so I'm having fun. Look, the one thing too, and this is just for anyone out there that wants to pursue anything creative, even if you're doing horrible things to characters, if you're having fun on the page and your editor has fun, and then your artist has a chance to have some of that fun, the reader will have a chance to also be infected with that fun. And that's very much what we're doing over on the Dead Rabbit business. And Mike Spicer is is coloring John, and boy, those two, they deserve some sort of awardee for what they're up to.
Mike's a very phenomenal talent. He's doing he's doing Extremity over at Image Skybound, and that book is just absolutely killer. But I do want to say, the last thing I want to say about John is, like, I've only had one conversation with him, and so I don't know him that well, but I have always kind of gotten the impression, especially with like the books that he's done at great length, particularly Hitman, that he's kind of simpatico with you in terms of the Team Radioactive sad clown thing, because like, I don't know, I mean, it's like there's like the sour and the sweet to like his work that I feel like will really jive with what you're doing, with what you like to do.
Yeah, I think so. I think the idea that we can have you laughing at something violent on one page and then super bummed out the next about something that's happening to one of these characters is, the gold standard for all this stuff, right? We'd want to feel something, right?
100%.
Whatever it is. And so, one of my favorite quotes ever, and this is a real aside now, is Roger Ebert. Have you ever heard this? That you can't talk someone out of a laugh or a boner.
I've not heard that, but that is a very good line.
And it is. It's really true. Like, you can sort of regret it after the fact of going, oh, that was low hanging fruit or whatever. But you as an experience, that's something like, hey, we earn our laughs, and we earn, when we gut punch someone. And so, yeah, I hope so. I think fans are look, again, about the retailing sort of, stat bump you get. I think it doesn't hurt to sort of go, hey, here's a new story, a crime story from, one of the Deadpool idiots and the co-creator of Hitman. That feels like I'm trying to help the retailers sort of have a fastball pitch for the book that hopefully, will get some traction. That feels good. I really greatly admire what Rick and Brubaker have done with their collaborators, and Brubaker in particular. Some of my favorite movies growing up were 70s films like the 7-Ups, and the Sorcerer was less a crime film really, but the 70s cinema. And when you see the sorts of stuff that John is doing, we talked a bunch about our inspirations, and where those two Venn diagrams overlap sits Dead Rabbit, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how cool this looks.
Yeah, I'm very excited for it. I'm looking forward to everyone reading Analog and for Dead Rabbit to come out. Gerry, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much, David. I appreciate it. I had a great time hanging out with you in Portland at ComicsPRO, and now a great time on your podcast. I hope I can come back sometime.
Of course. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Gerry Duggan. You can find him on Twitter at Gerry Duggan, and his work in Infinity Countdown, Deadpool, and the upcoming Image comic series Analog, which is coming up on final order cutoff, so get your orders in soon. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Dan Lee, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McCrea, Ira James Udaskin, Benjamin Birdie, Henning Allreds, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruto Batista, Abraham Reisman, Adrian Diaz, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.